Louis, can you please talk about the state of politics in the world from the divine's perspective, and how best we can use these examples to better ourselves? In my country of Australia, there is a lot of smallness, greed, selfishness, and drama going on in our government right now, in our federal government. Well, I'm sure you'll find, I'm not an expert on the 200-something countries of the world, but those qualities or lack thereof you're describing are existing all over the world right now, and in large measure, and not restricted to the world of politics. You'll find that in everywhere. It's in every facet of society and individual life as well. That old expression, it's always the darkest hour before the dawn. We're moving into the age of enlightenment, the age of Aquarius, and the beginning of the next, we're in the throes of the beginning of the next golden age. So we're leaving the Kali Yuga, this long, long age of darkness. So these things are seemingly at their very, very zenith as individual and collective consciousness is grappling and fighting with every breath to hold on to these antiquated, outdated, outmoded ways of being that are of darkness. And as the light continues to reclaim dominion of this planet, there's this seeming war of battle of holding on to that old when a new vibration and frequency is grabbing hold of the planet. So there's quite a storm going on. So I would rather not sit down and nitpick about individuals by name, which is a place that sadly many people like to go. And people do it in general too, If someone doesn't like the state of affairs, they'll want to blame the president or the king or the prime minister, the premier, for everything wrong in the government. And anyone with a brain cell knows, even one molecule of a brain cell knows that it takes more than one person to run an entire country. Maybe there could be some exception to that with dictators and tyrants, but for normal structured governments that you're describing, there's a whole, it's a field of consciousness that runs the country, and that is elected to some degree, directly or indirectly, by the people. So the government in place reflects the collective consciousness of the people, and it's important to maintain perspective of that rather than blaming individuals. We can look here. I'm sitting here in the United States, and there's the whole war going on about, pro-Trump versus anti-Trump, who's for him, who's against him, who likes him, his strengths, his weaknesses, his this, is that. And yet very few people want to look at the collective consciousness, look at the evolution of humanity, much less, the most important area, look at themselves. What does what you see on TV and in the news tell you and teach you about yourself? It's all about the power of one. The finger pointing is just as bad as the lethargy of sitting around waiting for something to happen. Who's going to do this and who's going to change that? You. You're the only one on the planet. So it's really about adopting it's all up to me consciousness. I've seen people complaining about trash and pollution, throwing trash in the street while they're complaining about it. That's how high the ignorance is and the projection, and the change happens through the power of one. So if there's something you don't see in the world, change that in yourself. Examine, where do I throw trash? And there might be ways that you pollute that you don't even think are polluting, or you're just not aware of it. If it was brought to your awareness, you'd say, oh my God, I can't believe I've been doing that for years. How much food do you throw away after a meal? While people are, eating feces in Africa and eating dirt pies in Haiti. They're feeding their kids dirt, and they're picking corn out of the cow manure. And how many people get up from a restaurant and throw away 30% of their meal, order way more than they can eat? How many people let food rot in their refrigerators? I see people around me physically in my own ashram do that constantly on a daily basis. Buy food, and then let it rot in the fridge when there are people dying in the street of starvation and mothers holding their babies and watching them die in their arms. That makes blood squirt out of the middle of my eyeballs, and it brings a pain in my heart that is indescribable. And yet people do it with reckless abandon and with great glee in their hearts, think nothing of it. I would cut the tongue out of my head before I would throw food away like that. So those types of crimes against humanity are what create on those, and that's an individual thing. One tiny thing, it's not tiny, but one act by one person in one moment. You multiply that times how many billion people on the planet are doing that? That's what creates the crap you see in the news. It starts by the one, because the one is not one, it's 2 million, it's 2 billion people doing that. If you looked at the number of people who don't finish their meals or order more than they can or let food rot in their fridge, we're talking about in the billions of people. Now, flip side, how many people are starving in the world? It's almost the same exact number. Fancy that. How is that so? See how it works, folks? And it'd probably come down to almost the same exact number. The number of people starving is perhaps equal, if not exactly equal, to the number of people wasting food on the planet. So, are you one of them? Look and see. Now, go category by category. Rather than sitting here and spending half your day criticizing whoever. I mean, you're talking about Australia, I was talking about the US, but there are countries all over the world, there are hundreds of countries. But people spend most of their time criticizing, complaining, but not making the changes in their own lives and seeing what they're doing that's out of integrity, that's out of alignment, that's not in accordance with the divine or divine will. And when you make the changes inside yourself, they will ripple out. Other people will see and make changes in themselves, even without seeing people change around you. And then it just, at some point hits collective critical mass, 100th monkey principle, and it changes in the world. I was with a beloved today having lunch, and we were having a conversation about the electric car and about when the Prius, which may have been the first one, I'm not sure, but it was one of the early ones, when the Toyota Prius came out, and people laughed at it and made fun of it, and it was dorky and stupid and this and that, and there were, the car only went 50 miles an hour. The charge lasted like 8 minutes. There were 3 charging stations in the whole country, so it's like it was a pointless, useless car. And yet people weren't recognizing that there were pioneers and inventors pushing the edge of civilization and of intelligence and of invention to create this. Of course, it's got to get the bugs out and it's got to catch on. But it took, not the same way it takes the pioneers to bring it into existence, it takes pioneers to go out on a limb and buy one and say, all right, I'll deal with that. I'll use it as, I won't drive very far. Or I'll use it only for small trips, or I'll just deal with the pitfalls of it. Because it takes people buying it and rolling up their sleeves and getting in the game to create a momentum till it builds. And eventually, within a couple of years, there was a 1.5-year waiting list for a Prius. And then, and then eventually people started seeing how popular they were, and other automakers started. Then the electric car got snuffed out of existence as a joke and a laughingstock, and then eventually it came back bigger than ever. And now it's become, an industry standard, and it's now fossil fuels that are on the way out, even though the oil companies and the other greedy powers that be want to hold on to it to extract the last remaining droplet of oil out of the earth. That's not going to happen. And eventually, the car manufacturers don't want to retool their plants, which would cost them tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, but they will, because we won't be using fossil fuels for very much longer. They're already being phased out slowly. So eventually, the car companies aren't going to close down. They'll retool. They'll do whatever they need to do as technology changes. But it takes pioneers, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of conviction to stand up for something and go against the grain, go against the collective for something in your heart is true. And that's a great life lesson across the board. So back to our original question about state of politics. Don't be concerned too much about who's in office and what the state is. let it be a reflection for you and look at where you need to change. And when you see things in the news and in politics you don't like, look in your own backyard. Look in your own front porch, in your own heart and soul and mind and life, and see what that is telling you about you. And find ways to continue to improve yourself, continue to become more kind, more loving, more giving, more selfless. And then you will see change will happen bigger and faster in the world. So we need to put these away because they really don't serve a whole lot of value, or just, point them back and look at yourself. And again, realize from what I was saying earlier that there are growing pains happening right now. As the light is reclaiming dominion, there's this struggle and tug-of-war, we literally have an entire civilization and world is crumbling in front of our eyes and in our midst, while this phoenix is rising of a new consciousness, a new way of being, and they're happening at the same time. One doesn't happen and then the other one comes in its place. They're happening at the same time. So that makes for a rather painful and arduous process. So it's important to also maintain focus, maintain perspective. There's that old saying, and forgive me for butchering the words, I don't know it by heart, but the parable goes is like, I think it's about two wolves. One is nice and one is mean or something like that, and which one wins or something like that? The one you feed. So I know I butchered that beyond fairly well, I apologize. But the moral of the story is, where your consciousness goes, your consciousness grows. And if you're going to dwell on everything that's wrong, everything that's negative, that's where your consciousness will go, and that will become your life. And then you'll cry and moan about that even more, which will bring and beget more of the same. It becomes a black hole, a downward spiral that pulls you in. It doesn't mean to be Pollyanna and be all like, hearts and flowers, and everything's wonderful. Everything's not wonderful. But everything is divinely in order and happening exactly as it should be. And it's important to maintain focus on who you are, who you want to be, where you want your life to go, and obviously flavored with love, kindness, respect, acceptance of others, non-judgment. Alrighty? Okie doke. I think we covered politics and a whole lot more there.